Edirne in modern Turkey is the site of the old Roman town of Adrianople. I'm Matthew Settle. In August 378 AD, a Roman army of 20,000, commanded by the Emperor Valens, faced a barbarian horde of over 100,000 under their leader Fritigern. They had to be stopped, or barbarian tribes from the German forest to the steppes of Asia would flood in and destroy the old empire. The Romans decided to halt the tribes here at Adrianople. Now, with new video game technology, you are about to see this great battle as never before. The vast numbers of soldiers, the troop formations, how they fought, and how the battle was won. Get the view the generals wish they had. Now, when decisive battles. By the end of the 4th century, the once mighty Roman Empire was in serious trouble. Economic collapse, barbarian raids, and civil war had brought it to its knees. All Rome's frontiers were under pressure. The barbarians were at the gates. Roman civilization was under threat.
There was not the centrality that we had seen in the 7 prior centuries. So it was more a conglomeration of peoples than it was a uniform language, a uniform culture, a uniform government that we'd seen in the past.
To make it easier to rule and defend, the Roman Empire had been split into eastern and western halves. In 378, the east was ruled by the Emperor Flavius Valens, and the west by his young nephew Flavius Gratian. According to the writings of Ammianus, a Roman officer at the time, Valens was 50 years old, an experienced commander, but he was lazy and getting fat, going blind in one eye. Gratian was also a skillful general, but only in his 20s. Valens was jealous of his younger nephew's success in the West.
Gratian, the nephew of Valens, who was young in his teens, then you had Valens himself, an older, more mature, but there was nobody on the scene who had fought in a series of campaigns over years and had the maturity of age and the vigor of youth.
The Roman legions were now employed in a mainly defensive role, guarding the empire's borders. The Goths were a nomadic people who had wandered from their overcrowded homeland, most probably Scandinavia, and had traveled steadily southward. For over 100 years in the east, the Goths and the Romans had faced one another across the Danube River.
They did not seek to have a chunk of the empire. They sought admission to the empire. And the reason they sought admission to the empire was that their world had been destroyed by the arrival of new peoples, primarily the Huns.
As the Goths' numbers grew into hundreds of thousands, they sought a new homeland, a place to settle, and they began to invade Roman territories. In the end, the Romans granted the Goths refugee status and allowed them to cross the Danube.
There were no census data to project how many hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people might be coming in. The commander on the scene would have been able to say to a boatload, "Sure, guys, come on in. You can bring your wives and family." The Danube is a huge river, up to half a mile wide. But the Goths were desperate, so in 376, they climbed aboard small rafts, boats, even hauled out logs and began to cross the swollen river. Some of them even tried to swim. Hundreds drowned. But the horde finally crossed it, and the Romans were alarmed with its size. They crossed the river. They were encamped, generally outside of these towns, and the food supplies ran out. According to our source, Ammianus Marcellinus, the Goths were so starved that rather than watching their children perish, they traded their children as slaves, sold them into slavery, and in return received dogs to eat. Thousands upon thousands of homeless, hungry, and heavily armed refugees camped inside the borders of the empire.
A local Roman leader, Lupicinus, panicked and ordered the assassination of the Gothic leaders.
Lupicinus invited the leaders to a banquet, and the banquet was going to be their last banquet. He set the stage for a massacre. Some of the Gothic commanders got out alive. One of them was Fritigern.
Several were killed, but Fritigern, a tribal chief, escaped, led the Goths in an open revolt. They immediately attacked the nearest Roman garrison, Adrianople. Lupicinus and his legions blocked the way to the city. But instead of attacking along a wide front, the Goths formed into long columns. Driven on by hunger and anger, they smashed through the Roman line. Lupicinus escaped, but 5,000 legionaries, most of his army, lay dead. Gratian had an army in Rome, but it was nearly 1,000 miles away. For now, Valens and his legions were all that stood between the barbarians and the end of the empire. In 378 AD, the Roman Empire is under threat from the Goths, a massive barbarian horde which has crossed the Danube and swamped Roman territory. 25,000 Roman infantry would meet the invaders here, in Turkey, at Adrianople. The Goths' numbers were growing all the time as other refugee tribes joined them. Tribes such as the Alans, with large numbers of cavalry, and the Huns. Like a plague of locusts, the refugees were stripping the land,